Hello, welcome everyone. We're going to give it a minute or so for folks to come in from the waiting room, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. If you're just joining, we're just going to give it 1 minute to allow folks to come in from the waiting room. We had more than 500 people sign up today, so I just want to make sure we get a critical mass, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Right, I think it's a critical mass. So welcome everyone to our Know Your Rights training. My name is Jessica Kiko. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Training here at the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. And I'm joined by my colleague.
I'm Catherine Ramirez Mejia, the Access and Resource Specialist here at Mayor Coalition.
Today's session is in webinar format to accommodate as many people as possible. So everyone's camera is off, you are muted, you won't be able to unmute yourself and ask a question. So we do ask that you use the question and answer tool that you should see at the bottom. And if not, put your questions in the chat and we'll try to respond to as many questions as possible. I will start with the presentation, which will run about 45 minutes. And then we'll reserve the rest of the time for questions. So today I hope to give you some information about your rights when it comes to immigration enforcement. I will also give you some tools so that you and your communities can feel more prepared in the event of immigration enforcement. There are a lot of things that we cannot control, but we can make sure that we are all informed. I also want to take a moment to tell you what I won't be covering today. I'm not going to talk about any potential immigration changes that may or may not happen in the future, and I'm not able to answer questions about individual questions. So as I mentioned, I work with the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. MIRA advocates to improve the lives of immigrants and refugees in Massachusetts, and our vision is a state where we can all thrive and we can all participate in our community's social, economic, and civic life, no matter where we come from or how we got here. We are primarily an advocacy organization. We also have a citizenship application assistance program and work a lot in educating, organizing, and mobilizing our communities. So we will begin with an overview of what immigration enforcement looks like. There are three big agencies in the Department of Homeland Security that work on immigration. The first one I'll talk about is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, who are the immigration police inside the United States. ICE arrests individuals who it is trying to deport and also represents the government in immigration court. The second one is Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, who are also immigration police, but this time on the border of the United States. They can carry out enforcement anywhere inside the 100-mile area all along the land and coastal borders of the United States. So you might see CBP officers at the Canadian and at the Mexican border, and they're also at all of our international airports. CBP will also sometimes carry out checkpoints anywhere within 100 miles of the border. So for example, you might see or hear about CBP checkpoints in northern New England, along roads in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, or upstate New York. And then the third agency is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS. They review applications and conduct interviews for asylum, for green cards, for special types of visas, and for citizenship. They can grant status to people who qualify, but they can also, of course, deny applications. There are unfortunately many ways that immigration can use to find individuals for deportation. Many people are encountered by CBP at the border when they try to enter the United States without valid documents or request an opportunity to enter the United States and apply for asylum. ICE officers can also detain people who are already in the United States. So when people are arrested by the police and they're charged with a crime, they're fingerprinted, and those fingerprints are automatically shared with the federal government, including immigration. And then immigration can decide whether it wants to take action and try to detain an individual or place them in deportation proceedings. So one of the most common ways that people can be identified by the police is through traffic stops. So we'll talk later about what your rights are if you're stopped while driving. But if you can, you should take steps now to make sure that you have a valid license and registration and that everything is in order. Enforcement can also happen as part of a raid or targeted efforts to detain specific individuals. Immigration can try to deport people because they don't have legal status in the United States. They can also try to deport people who have committed or have been convicted of certain crimes. Sometimes convictions for even minor crimes can lead to deportation. So it's not just kind of the most egregious criminal convictions that can lead to deportation. People can also be deported for violating immigration laws, like overstaying a visa or entering illegally or committing some type of immigration-related fraud. Anyone who's not a U.S. citizen can be vulnerable to deportation. People who don't have immigration status can be deported just for not having status. But even people who have immigration status can sometimes be deported. Usually that comes if someone has been convicted of a crime. An important thing to know is that if you have submitted an asylum application, you cannot be deported until after an immigration judge has reviewed your asylum application. And even then, if the immigration judge doesn't grant it, you have the right to file a timely appeal, and you cannot be deported while that initial appeal is pending either. Most immigrants inside the United States have due process rights and cannot be ordered deported without first going before an immigration judge and having a hearing in immigration court. So now that we've talked a little bit about the immigration enforcement systems, let's talk about what people's rights are in interactions with immigration enforcement and really law enforcement more broadly. The first thing to know is that everyone living in the US has certain basic rights under the US Constitution. And they have these rights regardless of their citizenship or immigration status. I also want to acknowledge that individuals may not always feel safe in asserting those rights. And so the aim of this training is to teach you how to assert your rights if you choose to do so. However, in order to make an informed decisions about whether and how to assert your rights, you have to first know what they are. So I want to begin by sharing a very useful tool that hopefully is already familiar to many of you, and that's a Know Your Rights card. There are many versions of Know Your Rights cards. The one that is pictured here is commonly referred to as the red card. It's made by an organization out in California, but there's nothing California specific about it. Asserting your right to remain silent can be difficult. It can be intimidating. There are language barriers. So it can be helpful to have a tool like a Know Your Rights card to help you communicate to the officer that you wish to remain silent, that you don't wish to answer any questions, and that you wish to assert the rights that are available to you. So on one side, it states in English that you don't wish to speak to the officer, you choose to exercise your constitutional rights to remain silent, that you're not giving consent to the officer to search your home if that is relevant, unless there's a judicial warrant. We'll talk about that. And then on the other side, in the individual's primary language, this card is not available in every language, but it's available in over a dozen commonly spoken languages in the United States. It reminds you of your constitutional rights. So if you're stopped by police or immigration, you can simply hand them this card without having to say anything more. So we're going to talk about a few scenarios in which you might encounter immigration enforcement. And the first one we'll talk about is what happens if immigration comes to your home. The first thing to note is that if immigration or the police knock on your door, you should not open the door immediately. So the first reaction should be to keep the door closed. And instead, you should first ask questions. You can ask the officer to identify themselves. You can ask them if they're police or immigration. Immigration will often identify, at least initially, as police or local law enforcement. They might not tell you the truth, even if you ask them to identify themselves. So regardless of the response, it's important to ask if they have a warrant signed by a judge. If they say they do, don't just take their word for it. You can ask them to show you the warrant. So they can do this by either putting the warrant under the door, if your door allows for that, or holding it up to a window if you're on the ground floor and you have an outside window, or holding it up to the peephole so that you can see and get a sense of the document that they're trying to show you. If the officer presents you with a judicial warrant, meaning a warrant signed by a judge, and it has your address on it, then if it's a search warrant, you must open the door. If it's an arrest warrant, then if the individual is present, they should go through the door and essentially turn themselves over. So I'm going to teach you in a minute how to recognize a judicial warrant versus some other documents that immigration commonly shows. So if there is no judicial warrant, then you can choose to keep your door closed. You can slide the Know Your Rights card under the door and you can tell the officer, I request my right to remain silent and my right to an attorney. At that point, if you have an immigration lawyer, you should call one. Or your local immigrant rights organization, or if there's a local rapid response network, or a US citizen, friend or family member, to at least let them know what is happening. So how can you tell if the piece of paper the officer is showing you is a judicial warrant? It probably won't say judicial warrant right on it. But it's going to look different depending on what court issued the warrant. Usually, if immigration is presenting with a judicial warrant, which they generally do not have, it will be a federal court that issued the warrant. So it can look different, but it will always be signed by a judge and have the name of a court on it. So look for the signature and see if it says judge underneath it. And that's how you will know if it's a judicial warrant, meaning a warrant that has been issued by a judge, by a court after deciding that there's probable cause to issue the warrant. On the left here, you see an example of a warrant signed by a judge. Like I said, it can look in different ways. Immigration officers rarely have a warrant that has been signed by a judge. Instead, what they normally have is a different piece of paper that is also called warrant, but doesn't give them the same rights. So generally, they have something that is called warrant for arrest of alien, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner of the document on the right. And it will say U.S. Department of Homeland Security at the top. And then this one is not signed because it's just a sample, but if it's signed, you would see that the signature would be of an immigration officer rather than a judge. All that this paper does is give immigration the authority to arrest someone in public. It does not give them the permission to enter the home, even if they suspect that the person that they're looking for is inside that home. So remember, if ICE does not have a judicial warrant, you do not have to open the door to your home. If they do have a judicial arrest warrant, you still don't have to open the door, but the person whose name is on the judicial arrest warrant can step out of the house. And what that will do is it will protect other household members who were not included in the warrant and will not force them to have any interaction with the officers. If they have a judicial search warrant that does entitle them to enter the home, again, that would be a warrant signed by a judge that allows them to search the home, but this is very rare and will almost never happen in the context of immigration enforcement. Next, I'm going to speak briefly about being stopped while driving. The first thing to know is that if you live in Massachusetts, you're a resident of Massachusetts, you're eligible to get a driver's license regardless of your citizenship or immigration status. And that the information that you share with the RMV when you're applying for a driver's license cannot be shared with immigration except in very rare circumstances. Usually when you're getting a license for the first time, you first get something called a driver's permit. And after having the permit for 6 months, you're eligible to take the road test and get your full driver's license. When you have a driver's permit, you have some limits on your ability to drive. And the most important one is that you have to have someone else sitting in the car with you anytime that you're driving. And that other person has to be at least 21 years old, and they need to be someone who has been driving for at least a year. What we are seeing is that sometimes people are getting a driver's permit and are driving without that second experienced driver in the car. And if that happens and they're pulled over, driving without that second driver is considered driving without a valid license, because that person is not able to drive on a permit without that second experienced driver in the car. And so to avoid citations for driving without a license, which again can flag individuals for immigration enforcement, it's really important to obtain a full driver's license as soon as possible if you currently only have a permit. So what to do if you're stopped by police or immigration enforcement while driving? The first thing to remember is that you have to stop and pull over safely. You have to remain in the car, keep your hands on the steering wheel so the officer can see them. And if you need to reach into your pocket or a bag or a purse or the glove compartment in order to present the license or registration, because usually the officer will come over to the window and ask for license and registration, it's best to ask the officer for permission to reach into the bag or pocket or glove compartment or whatever it is, to avoid any confusion and to stop them from thinking that you might be reaching for a weapon. So as the driver, the other thing to note is that you should roll down the window just enough to be able to easily pass documents back and forth, but you don't need to roll down the window the entire way. As a driver, you have to provide your name and address whenever you're stopped while driving, but you don't need to answer any other questions, including any questions about where you were born or what your immigration status is. Instead, you can tell the officer that you're exercising your right to remain silent. You can present to them a Know Your Rights card. If you have one, it's a good idea to keep one in the car, to keep one by the front door of the house, to keep one in your wallet, so one is always available. The police can only search the car if they have your consent or if they have probable cause to believe that you've been involved in a crime. You can state clearly that you do not consent to a search. You're not always going to know if they have probable cause to believe you've been involved in a crime, but saying that you do not consent can be helpful to you later on. However, if they choose to search your car, do not prevent them from doing so and do not interfere. Passengers in the car are actually generally free to leave. And so any passenger in the car can simply say, "Am I free to leave?" And unless you're being issued a citation, for example, for not wearing a seatbelt, they're free to leave. And if it's safe for them to do so, they can calmly walk away from the car. Obviously, if you're pulled over and you're on the highway, a passenger isn't going to be able to simply walk away and do so safely, but in other circumstances, they might be able to do so. And lastly, and very importantly, you should not provide any false documents or even carry them with you. If you're detained, immigration will search you. And if you have false documents on you or with you, that will make your potential immigration case even more complicated. So the next scenario we're going to look at is what happens if immigration or the police stops you in public. Again, it's important to remember to stay calm and not to run. You can simply ask, "Am I under arrest or am I free to leave?" If you're told that you're not under arrest and you're free to leave, then you can simply walk away calmly. If you are detained or arrested, do not resist. You can tell the officer that you wish to exercise your right to remain silent and your right to speak with an attorney. And the important thing to know is that immigration and the police don't have the right to fingerprint you unless you're being detained or arrested by them. So I know that in the past, we've heard some instances of kind of mobile fingerprinting units. People can decline to be fingerprinted unless you're being arrested. And again, remember never to provide false documents. If you are an adult, if you're 18 years old or older and have some type of immigration documentation, the law says that you have to carry those documents with you at all times. So if someone has a green card, if someone has a work permit, If someone has a receipt notice, even of a pending application, or if the only thing they have is a notice indicating that they're already in removal proceedings, it can be helpful to carry that with them. And I can see questions coming in, but I'm not able to respond to them right now. So I'll cover that at the end. So a few more things to know to help you be prepared, you and your communities. So you can review all this information so that you and everyone around you knows your rights in case an officer asks questions or comes to your home. This sounds really simple and silly, but memorize phone numbers for your family members. Definitely memorize a phone number for an attorney if you have one, or an organization that you trust. I realized as I was preparing these slides that I don't know my two sons' phone numbers, so I'm going to be working on that. If you're detained or arrested, you may only be given an opportunity to make one call, so it's important to have the right phone numbers memorized. If you have a lawyer, that one call should be to your lawyer, and then you can ask the lawyer to notify your family. If you do not have an attorney, then call a family member and charge them with trying to find a lawyer as soon as possible without delay. And then the other thing that you can do is to think of a US citizen or someone with secure immigration status, but really a US citizen would be preferable, that you trust, who can go and pay your immigration bond to get you released from immigration detention in the event that you are detained. It's a good idea to talk to this person in advance. If you are arrested or detained, it's important to know that you should not sign anything, and you should also not agree to voluntary departure, which is a way that the government can force you to leave the country without giving you any of the rights of going in front of an immigration judge and fight your deportation case. You should consult with a lawyer before signing anything or agreeing to voluntary departure. Definitely consult with a qualified legal representative, and don't rely on what immigration officers tell you about your rights. They're not required to tell you the truth or to inform you of your legal rights. You always have the right to remain silent, to call a lawyer or family member. You always have the right to visits from your lawyer, and to contact your consulate if you think that your consulate can be helpful to you. If someone you know has been detained, there's an online detainee locator website. The website is locator.ice.gov, and you can use that to see where the person has been detained. In order to look for someone, you need to know their country of birth, as well as either their A number, which is their immigration identity number, or their complete name. This can be tricky when someone has a multi-part last name because they might not have entered it in the correct order, or they might have hyphenated it or not hyphenated it, or only used one part of a multi-part last name. So you can try different options there. If someone is detained, there is often a delay, sometimes of several hours, sometimes even a day, before they will show up in the online detainee locator. It's also possible to call the local ICE office to ask for that information, but you might not get through. So when immigration decides that they want to deport someone, they can choose to place the person in immigration detention. There's many, many more people facing deportation proceedings right now than there are people in immigration detention. So the vast majority of individuals that immigration is trying to deport by placing them in immigration court proceedings are not in detention. But they do detain a certain number of people, and we might see that number of people go up. So if you are detained, many individuals are able to be released on by paying a bond, which is kind of like a bail. It's what we call bail in immigration. Immigration will sometimes set a bond amount, but you can also ask that the immigration judge review the bond amount that was set initially by ICE. It's best to work with the legal representative in preparing the request for the immigration judge to review the bond amount, because you might only get one opportunity to do so. So when requesting release on bond or for the bond amount to be lowered, what they're looking at is you being able to show that you're likely to show up for future hearings or appointments, and that you have strong family and community ties that will keep you rooted in the area. The bond can be set for as low, I say as low as, it's not low, but for a minimum of $1,500. But many times bond amounts are significantly higher, $10,000 or higher. Only someone who's a US citizen or again has really secure immigration status should go to an immigration office to pay someone's bond. Someone who does not have safe immigration status should not be showing up at any immigration office. The next topic we will discuss is knowing your rights when it comes to your children and family. So if you have a parent, you have rights as a parent regardless of your citizenship or immigration status. In interactions with immigration enforcement, sometimes the immigration will try and get information about other family members that may be subject to immigration enforcement. So you generally don't have to provide information about your children or other family members. However, if you are the primary caretaker of children, especially if they're US citizen children, you will want to tell immigration that you're the primary caretaker, because that will likely impact their decision of whether or not to detain you if they're considering detention in your case. If you are detained by immigration, you have the right to make arrangements for your child's care. So you can ask for an additional phone call in addition to using your phone call to call an attorney or a family member who will then call an attorney. You can ask for an additional phone call for the purposes of making arrangements for your children. And you can also ask for information about how you will be able to contact your children while in detention. If your children are in the foster care system and there is a family court case regarding your children, you have the right to participate in those proceedings, regardless of whether you're detained or even after you've been deported. So immigration, detention, and deportation should not be considered abandonment as far as your ability to take care of your children goes. And immigration has a duty to facilitate your participation in those proceedings. So it's helpful to be prepared as a family, not just you as a parent, but really having some family conversations around this. Massachusetts advocates back in 2017 created this packet that you see pictured here, this advice for immigrant families. It's available in English, Spanish, Portuguese. It's also available in Haitian Creole. It looks a little bit different. That's why I didn't picture it here, but it's available in Haitian Creole. And some key parts of it are also available in Arabic, and advocates are working to get this translated into additional languages. The Boston Medical Center has also prepared a very thorough family preparedness plan that is linked on this slide. This family preparedness plan packet can be particularly helpful for families that have members of the family, especially children that have significant medical needs, as it provides some additional tools around making arrangements for medical care as well. So what is family preparedness? A family preparedness plan is a tool that can help you make informed decisions about how to take care of your family in the event of immigration detention or deportation of a parent. Though I will say there are many pieces of this that are simply helpful for all parents to think through, even if immigration detention and deportation are not a possibility. So it guides you through gathering information and making decisions about who might be able to step in and take care of your children in your absence, making plans for your child's educational, medical, emotional needs, and in some cases, making plans for family reunification with your child or children if a parent is deported or leaves the country. So here are a few things that you can do to prepare in advance. The first is to review information about what trusted adults have permission to pick up your child or children from school or from after school activities. This is good for everyone to do. You can also tell the school, your children's school, that you do not wish to have your family's information included in the family directory information. Family directory information is information that can be shared and be made available to immigration. So if you don't want your family's address, phone number, language of preference, or other information to be available, you can opt out of being part of the family directory. You should also register your child's birth with the consulate of your country of origin if your child was born in the United States. If your child later on wants to travel or move to the parent's country of origin, it's easier if the child's birth has already been registered with that consulate. Applying for passports for the children, that includes US passports as well as foreign passports if those children are dual citizens. Generally, both parents have to provide permission for a child to get a passport. If you have sole legal custody or a court order giving you sole legal custody, you don't need the parent's permission, the other parent's permission to get a US passport. In Massachusetts, unwed mothers generally have sole legal custody unless a court has decided otherwise. And then the last tip here is to write a travel letter to allow your child to travel outside the United States with a trusted adult in the event that that becomes necessary. So there's a lot of information on this slide, and again, this information is available in the packets. So parents may also wish to consider who may take care of their children if they are detained or deported. So there are a number of options to consider, ranging from more informal options to more formal options. The most informal option here on the left is simply to talk to a family member or friend who you want to take care of your child if you're not available. You can put this in writing to this trusted adult, what your wishes are for your child or what you want to happen in the case of an emergency. It doesn't require any kind of formal document, but it also doesn't give your chosen caregiver any legal rights when it comes to interactions with schools or doctors. Any informal arrangement that you have won't be recognized. A more formal option is to complete something called a caregiver authorization affidavit. This document gives the caregiver of your choice the right to make decisions about your child's healthcare and education for a period of up to 2 years. It doesn't take away any of the rights of the parents, so the rights of the parents continue right along with the caregiver that has been chosen. The document has to be signed by the parent or parents, as well as 2 witnesses, and it has to be notarized. There's a sample caregiver authorization affidavit form in the Advice for Immigrant Families packet that is good for Massachusetts because family law is state law. This will look a little bit different in each state. Another option is the temporary agent authorization form. Like the caregiver authorization affidavit, it allows the caregiver to make decisions about healthcare and education, but it also adds power over financial decisions. It's only valid for 60 days instead of up to 2 years that the caregiver authorization affidavit is valid for, but it can be renewed. Generally, both parents have to sign it if both parents are available, and it has to be signed by the chosen caregiver as well as 2 witnesses. And then the most formal option is to seek guardianship in family court. So this is the only option that actually requires to go into court and kind of gives the decision to, in this case, a family court judge to appoint a guardian. The guardian would have all the same rights as a parent with a few exceptions that generally don't apply. But the difference is that the guardian would be exercising those rights instead of the parent. So the parent is transferring those rights to a guardian for the period of the guardianship. So a family court judge may not always agree with the parent's choice of a guardian. So seeking guardianship may not always be the option that makes sense for a particular family, and families should consult with a family lawyer before asking a family court to take action regarding children, including guardianship. One last thing around being prepared. When it comes to immigration, documents are really important, and not just the documents that are about status, but pretty much any piece of paper that you get from immigration. So try to keep all documents in a safe place. This can include immigration documents, but also other important documents like birth certificates for all family members, health records, passports, and more. You may wish to make a copy of all important documents, give them to a trusted individual to keep. You can also take pictures of important immigration documents to save to your email or mobile device or whatever you feel is safe, so that you can access them easily if the need arises. Many immigration documents will have the individual or individual's A number on it. Again, that's the immigration identity number. It looks like a social security number, but it is not a social security number. It's a completely different number. It's a very important number because that can help you identify information about your case, including where someone is detained, if the individual is detained, or when their next immigration court hearing is, for example, if they're in immigration court. Some documents may have other important information, like the date of upcoming immigration court hearing or interview. These dates are also really important. Missing a hearing in immigration court can result in the person being ordered deported in their absence. And now in this section, I'm going to talk briefly about access to public benefits. So here we're switching gears a little bit. We're not talking about interactions with law enforcement, but what we saw in the last administration is a lot of fear in immigrant communities around accessing public benefits. Fear that somehow accessing public benefit is going to have consequences related to immigration status, whether that be immigration enforcement, or something else. And so I want to talk a little bit about the so-called public charge rule. But before I talk about the rule, I want to start by making four things very clear. Four things very clear. The first one is that immigrant parents can always apply for benefits for their U.S. citizen children, even if the parent is not eligible. So even though the parent might be the one completing the form, and the form might ask for the parent's social security number, they do not need to include the parent's social security number or the parent's immigration status information if the benefits are being applied for just for the benefit of the U.S. citizen children or non-citizen children who qualify for the benefits. The second thing is that though access to benefits is limited to non-citizens, you don't need to be a U.S. citizen to get all benefits. There are many benefits that are available to individuals in a variety of immigration statuses, and even some benefits that are available to individuals that have no immigration status. Under the current public charge rule, which I'll say more about in the next slide, there are no immigration consequences for applying for or receiving benefits other than cash assistance for income maintenance and long-term nursing home care. And I'll go into this point a little bit more in the next few slides. There's also no consequences if other family members are receiving those benefits. This rule may change in the next administration, but nothing has changed yet. And then lastly, and importantly, state benefits agencies like DTA and Mass Health and healthcare providers in Massachusetts do not report a person's immigration status to ICE. So what is public charge? So public charge is part of the test about who can, part of the test that immigration uses to determine whether someone can be allowed to enter the United States. There are many immigrants that don't have to worry about the public charge test at all. The rule really only applies to individuals that are applying for a green card or a visa to the US. And in practice, it applies to individuals that are applying for a green card based on family members. That means that people who already have green cards, people who are US citizens, people who are applying for status based on a humanitarian route, like VAWA or U or T visa or special immigrant juvenile status, are not subject to the public charge test at all. There's also no public charge test for DACA or TPS. So really, public charge is just about people who are in the process of applying for a green card through a family member. Under the current public charge rule, the government only looks at whether the individual applying for the green card has used cash assistance for income maintenance. So that's TFTC, SSI, EADC, or long-term care in an institutional setting like a nursing home at government expense. All other benefits like food stamps, housing, healthcare, etc., are not considered by immigration at all. Because many of these benefits are not available to individuals who don't yet have a green card, in practice, Most people who are applying for a green card through family members and therefore have to go through the public charge test will not even have been eligible to obtain either of these benefits that are relevant in passing that test. So a reminder then that most benefits are not considered at all under the current public charge rule. These benefits will not impact a person's immigration status under the current rule. They include all healthcare programs other than long-term nursing home care, all housing programs, all food programs, all earned benefits like unemployment and pensions, and many other types of benefits, right? If it's not general cash assistance or long-term institutionalized care, they're considered safe benefits. And there's a link here to a document that we created a couple of years ago that attempts to compile a comprehensive list of these safe benefits that will not have any immigration consequences under the current rule. Now, I've said under the current rule a few times. So the current rule was put into federal regulations by the Biden administration. So it was strengthened. It's not just a policy that a federal administration can decide to change from one day to the next. It's part of our federal regulations. And it has also survived court challenges. It is very possible that the incoming Trump administration could try to change the rule, as it has done in the past, to make it more difficult for immigrants who have used public benefits to qualify for a green card through a family member. But no changes would take effect immediately. Like with other changes to immigration law and policy that could have a negative impact on immigrant communities, any change to the current public charge rule is going to be challenged in the courts by advocates. And then finally, keep in mind that even under the prior Trump administration, where there was a bad public charge rule that took effect for a short period of time, only a very small number of people were ever denied a green card on that basis. So primarily what the rule did is create a significant chilling effect that we can all combat together through education. And then the very last thing that I want to touch upon before trying to answer as many of your questions as possible is where to get help and legal advice about individual immigration cases. So the most important thing to know is who is qualified to provide legal advice and who is not. Only lawyers with a valid license and individuals who have been recognized as accredited representatives by the federal government are able to give you legal advice. So most people know what a lawyer is, but an accredited representative is an individual who works with a nonprofit organization, and both the individual and the organization have received training and special permission from the US government to be able to allow them to provide immigration legal advice, even though they're not lawyers. You can always confirm if someone is a lawyer or accredited representative. So if they're a lawyer and they're licensed in Massachusetts, you can look them up on the Massachusetts Board of Bar Overseers. They have an attorney lookup function where you just put the name and they will tell you if they're currently licensed. That's the massbbo.org is the website. And you can confirm if an individual or an organization are accredited by searching for them in the Department of Justice roster of accredited representative. There's no easy website that I can read off to you, but if you Google DOJ roster of accredited representatives, it should be the first thing that pops up. And you can look for them by state, you can look for them by name or by name of the organization. That means that other individuals that are out there saying that they can help you with your immigration case, if they're not attorneys or accredited representatives, that includes people like notary publics or notarios, or people that fill immigration forms and do interpretation and tax preparation. Those individuals, if they're not also attorneys or accredited representatives, are not qualified or authorized to provide legal advice. And well-intentioned helpers, like service providers, unless your attorneys or accredited representatives, are also not authorized to provide immigration legal advice, though they may be in a position to share helpful general information. If someone has been the victim of fraud by someone saying they're authorized to give you legal advice when they aren't, you can make a report. The report can sometimes be helpful in your particular situation, but importantly, can also help protect other individuals from the same situation. There's a few different ways to make a report. There's a dedicated phone and online form through the Attorney General's Office of Massachusetts. If you have a complaint about an attorney, you can make that complaint through the Massachusetts Board of Bar Overseers. And if an individual is already in immigration court, I do not recommend going this route if you're not in immigration court. But if you do already have a case in immigration court, there's also a phone number and email to report abuses through the Immigration Court Fraud and Abuse Prevention Program. So now that you know where not to get assistance, where to get assistance, there are a number of nonprofit organizations in Massachusetts that provide free and low-cost legal services. There's a directory available at MassLRF, that's the Massachusetts Legal Resource Finder, masslrf.org. You'll be asked some screening questions and then given a list of organizations in your area. And then you should try and reach out to those organizations and get on a wait list and see if you can schedule an appointment. I say this knowing that nonprofit legal service providers are already at capacity, and they will continue to be at capacity in the near future. So it's important to kind of call different organizations and to call until you can speak with someone and be added to a wait list if a wait list is available. If you have a case in immigration court, the immigration court also provides you with a list of legal services in the state. If you're a Boston resident, the city of Boston offers free consultations twice a month, and you have to call in advance to schedule an appointment. And finally, if you're leaving Massachusetts or if you're trying to assist someone who's not in Massachusetts or in another state, there's a link here to a national directory of immigration legal services providers. So we know that it feels like there's a lot that we cannot control. There is a lot that we cannot control, but there are things that we can all do to try and keep ourselves and our community safe. And we hope that this presentation has given you some tools and some of those resources. There's many more resources that are available on our website. There's one-page handouts in multiple languages. There's links to those Know Your Rights cards on our website as well, posters, links to some videos about who's authorized to provide you immigration legal services and much more. So I will leave it here for just a moment so people can scan the QR code if they so wish, and then I'm going to try my best to answer some questions.